Lekute Sichis, Chelek Chaf Aleph, Vayakhel, Sicha Aleph, Lili Nishmis Rabbi Yosef Benyamin ben Rabbi Menashe Kaltman. The Sicha is also a siyum on Hilchas Beis Hamikdash. Hilchas Beis Hamikdash is the first set of halachas in Sefer Avodah which speak about the building of the Beis Hamikdash, the Beis Hamikdash, the house that was chosen by Hashem. These are the last two halachas. It is primarily an inyan in Nigla. However, even the Nigladike Hesber, even the Nigladike explanation has a very Chassidish twist to it, and a very Gishmak Sicha. In Sof, when the letzten Perek von Hilchas Beis Hamikdash, at the end of the last chapter of Hilchas Beis Hamikdash, in welchen the Rambam is mevared the dinim for Shmiras Hamikdash, which primarily the Rambam is discussing the laws of guarding the Beis Hamikdash. Nach dem, wie is metayer in Halacha Yud Aleph, after describing in Halacha Yud Aleph, the 11th Halacha, which is the second to last Halacha, the Azaydi Kehanim of Yedin in Devri, B'Shachar Koydem Sheyala Amud HaShachar Samach Lo, how the Kehanim every morning before the break of dawn, Beide Geven mit Shtei Avuke Shel Ur B'Yadam, they would inspect the Azara, the Beis Hamikdash, holding two torches of fire. In der Azara, sie als is dort in Ordnung, to make sure that everything is in order, in its place, ready for the day's work. So that's what the Rambam says in Halacha Yud Aleph, and he describes how it was done. They would come in, there would be two groups, they would walk in two different directions, they would meet at the end, and they would say to each other, Shalom HaKoil Shalom, peace, all is peace. After that, Firtush the Rambam in Halacha Yud Beis Bifnei Atzma, the Rambam then concludes in the next halacha, halacha Yud Beis, which is in a halacha for itself, even though, as we're going to see later, it continues the discussion of halacha Yud Aleph. The Rambam writes as follows: Kaseder Hazeh, following this protocol, meaning the two groups, the Kohanim going in two different directions, meeting at the end. This entire protocol, Oisin b'chol layla v'layla, is done every single night, meaning at the end of the night. Chutz mileli Shabbos, excluding the night of Shabbos, which, although they would do the inspection, but she'ein biyadam ur ela boidkin b'neides adlukin sham erev Shabbos, they're not carrying torches in their hands. Rather, they are using the light of the lamps that were lit from erev Shabbos. Probably the reason for that is because it's Shabbos, and they didn't want to carry fire on Shabbos, so therefore they used the light that was already kindled from before Shabbos. Is Yodua the Shailas Mefarshim? So there's a well-known question by the Mefarshim. In this case, the Kesef Mishnah and others. Their din is doch the Rambam Paskin bekam mekaymes as ein shvuz b'mikdash. The Rambam Paskins in numerous places. Ein shvuz b'mikdash. Shvuz is a prohibition on Shabbos that is only a rabbinic prohibition, something that min haTorah would be allowed, and the Rabbanan, the Chachamim, for whatever reason, made a gzeira. They instituted that this should remain aser, even though min haTorah wouldn't be aser. However, in the Beis Hamikdash, ein shvuz b'mikdash. These things that were prohibited by the Chachamim are not prohibited in the Beis Hamikdash as part of the Avodah. So that, and the Rambam agrees to this. The Rambam Paskins this in numerous places. To carry the candles, to move the candles from place to place, not to kindle the candles or to extinguish the candles, but just to move them from place to place, is only a nisr shvus, is only a dirabanan. You're not allowed to light the candle, you're not allowed to extinguish the candle, but to move an already lit candle and to carry it with you as you inspect the Beis Hamikdash would only be a nisr shvus, only be a rabbinic prohibition. So the question is, why is there an issue of the Kohanim holding these torches in their hands if it's only a Shavuos and there's no Shavuos prohibition in the Beis Hamikdash? The Kesef Mishnah answers as follows: Ashayni hacha the efshir b'neides adlukim erev Shabbos. This case is different because there is another way. It's possible to inspect the Azara with pre-existing candles as they are hanging on the walls or wherever they were placed before Shabbos. Since there is a possibility to inspect while avoiding to transgress the Shavuos, therefore we do not permit the Shavuos. In other words, the Kesef Mishnah is saying, when do we say Ein Shavuos B'Mikdash? When there's no other choice. But if there's another choice, as there is in this case, we don't say Ein Shavuos B'Mikdash. This question needs further examination. As other Mefarshim ask, the Rebbe references the Mishnah L'Melech. Both the Kesef Mishnah and the Mishnah L'Melech are noisei kelim of the Rambam, are commentaries on the Rambam. So the Kesef Mishnah defends the Rambam's position by saying that in this case we don't say Ein Shavuos B'Mikdash because there is another option. Says the Mishnah L'Melech, this answer isn't understood. The Rambam Paskins in the halachas of Yom Kippur. This is with regards to the fact that the Kohen Gadol had to go to the mikveh 5 times during Yom Kippur. During the day of Yom Kippur, there were 5 instances where the Kohen would change his clothing from either the gold clothes to the white clothes, or vice versa. And at that time, the Kohen Gadol would go to the mikveh. Says the Rambam, if the Kohen Gadol was elderly or he was ill and having to go into a freezing cold mikveh 5 times in one day would be dangerous, then then we heat up slabs of metal in fire from before Yom Kippur, and the next day they place these heated slabs into the water to remove the chill of the water. And even though taking a boiling hot slab of metal and putting it into the water that's going to cause the water to boil is a shvus, is a derabanan, nevertheless, it says that I'm not a problem. She'ein shvus b'mikdash. There's no issue of shvus in the Beis Hamikdash, and therefore, even though this is an issue derabanan, but nevertheless, being that it's in the Beis Hamikdash, it's allowed to be done to make it easier for the Kohen Gadol to go to the mikveh. Chach, as oich in dem fall, even though in this case there is another option, as onitzayin kin shvus, to do something that would help the Kohen Gadol without transgressing a shvus. The Rambam himself concludes in the same halacha. Another option is to mix hot water in the mikveh water. In this case, this is not an Issa D'Rabbanan because you're taking the hot water that's not in a kli rishain, and you're pouring it into the other water that is, and it's not going to become hot. It's just going to take away the chill of the cold water, and therefore it's not an Isser even D'Rabbanan. So there is a second option here, and yet the Rambam paskins that we could use the other option, which is a shvus, she'ein shvus b'mikdash. So we see that the Rambam paskins ein shvus b'mikdash, even when there is another way to go. Zoisvoid, here is another example. The Rambam paskins, as if the Kohen Gadol bikish lisnamnim, the night of Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol is not allowed to sleep. So if the Kohen Gadol begins to doze off, is pirchei levia makim lefanov be'etz batzreida, the young koyanim would snap their fingers. Even though snapping the fingers is a shvus, it's similar to clapping, which according to the Rambam is not allowed on Shabbos because it's making a sound. It's mashmiya koil. Even though there's other ways to wake up the kohen. You could call his name, you could scream at him, you could move his chair. There are other ways to do so. There's other ways, other methods to help the kohen remain awake. Nevertheless, the Rambam says you could snap the kohen could snap their fingers, even though it's a shvus. So here are 2 examples where the Rambam paskins that ain't shvus b'mikdash, even when there is another option. So how does the Kesef Mishnah say that according to the Rambam, ain't shvus b'mikdash only applies to a case where there's no other option? Here we see 2 examples for that. The Pashtus Kama Mechalek Zayin. So the Rebbe in Sif Beis is going to make a differentiation, a distinction between the different cases. The Rebbe is going to suggest that both the case of the Kohen Gadol falling asleep or the case of the Kohen Gadol being elderly or sick is in itself an out of the ordinary case. And therefore, we're more lenient. But if it was an ordinary case, if it was part of the protocol, part of something that happens all the time, then we would not be lenient about the shvus if we have another choice. Let's see that inside. This rule that we say ein shvus b'mikdash, that one is permitted to transgress a shvus, even when there's another option, is blaze with us as an arai, is only when it is an out of the ordinary situation. There's a unique situation that can be handled by transgressing a shvus. Then we would allow the person to break the shvus, even if there is another choice. For example, if the Kohen Gadol is elderly or ill, or he's falling asleep, das heißt, Seder HaKavua can nicht sein verbunden mit der Shvus. The regular order of things, the established order of things, cannot be connected with, cannot depend on a Shvus if there's another choice. But if there's a unique, unexpected situation, then you could rely on the heter of shvus, even if there's another choice. And in our Rambam, he's talking about an established protocol every single Shabbos. Und der Fall ist, wie bald sie es öfter bei Öfen Acher, ist man nicht koiveya anagas akeine bei Öfen Kozeh, also so ständig Öfen Tan Shvus B'Mikdash. And since there is another choice to use the candles that were lit before Shabbos, therefore we don't want to establish a weekly, but even if it's not weekly, but if it's an inyan kavua, if it's an established order to do something every single time, when it's really a shvus, when it's really an iser derabanan. So this is the Rebbe's Chelek between why in one place the Kesef Mishnah says that the Rambam holds that Ein Shvus B'Mikdash doesn't apply if there's another option, because in that case it was a Seder Kavua, it was an established order of events. Whereas in other places the Rambam is more mekel, and he says we do say Ein Shvus B'Mikdash because those were extraordinary situations. And the Rebbe now refutes his own husband. The Hasbara is aber nit maspika. Not a sufficient explanation. We find another instance where there is a permission to break a shvus, even though it is a seder kavua. It's not an extraordinary situation. What's the example? If the 14th day of Nisan, which is Erev Pesach, falls out on Shabbos, and then you have to do the Karban Pesach on Shabbos, the Karban Pesach overrides Shabbos. Is there din as men is mafshit them or from them Karban al gabe amakles? The din is that you suspend the animal from the rods, so that way you could take the skin off, you could skin the animal. Now, generally speaking, to skin an animal is actually an av melacha, is an isra deiraisa. But when you're skinning the animal, not to use the skin, but you need it you need the meat for the carbon or for any other reasons, but it's not for the oiroi, it's not for the skin, then skinning the animal is a derabanan, is a shvus. Now, over here, we're saying that you're allowed to skin the animal even when on the rods, which is breaking a shvus. Just as you do it during the week. Even though there is a way out to make it a non-shvus. For example, one example that's brought is if you had two koyanim standing next to each other and they would suspend the animal from the shoulders of the koyanim, then you would be doing it with a shinui, not the way it's regularly done, and then it's not even a derabanan, it's not even a shvus. So there is a way to do so by not doing a shvus, and nevertheless the Rambam paskins that you do so in this way, al gabe amakles. Why? Because ain't shvus b'mikdash. Even though it's a seder kavua, and it's efsher binyan acher, even though it's the normal order of it's an established order, and there are other ways to do it. Und tzadeichik zu sagen, as Erev Pesach shechol dies b'Shabbos is gerechnet v'arai v'balsa kvius nor mizman lizman, and you can't really answer that Erev Pesach shechol b'Shabbos is called an extraordinary situation because it only happens once in every few years. Because at the end of the day, since it happens on a regular basis, even if it's not every week or every single year, it's still considered a seder kavua. And therefore, if the explanation was that that ein shvus b'mikdash, when we don't say ein shvus b'mikdash, if there's another way out, that it doesn't apply to a seder kavua, then it wouldn't have applied to Erev Pesach Chol b'Shabbos, and we see that it does apply. We are saying ein shvus b'mikdash. So we're back now to our original question. Why is it that in the case of the inspection that was done by the Koyanim on Shabbos, early Shabbos morning or Friday night before the end of the night, does the Rambam paskin to not use the torches, even though using the torches would be a shvus, and ein shvus b'mikdash, there's no prohibition of shvus in the Beis Hamikdash. Siv Gimel, the Rebbe is going to ask two more questions on the placement of these halachas. In the halachas anal b'siyum hilchas Beis Hamikdash, zenefran noch kama diyukim kloliyim, in these halachas as they are in the end of hilchas Beis Hamikdash, we have another couple of general points to point out. Aleph, farvos bring the Rambam od dem inyan hilchas shmiras Beis Hamikdash. The 8th Perek of hilchas Beis Hamikdash is focused primarily on the dinim of guarding the Beis Hamikdash. Why are these halachas that are about inspecting the Beis Hamikdash to prepare for the day's work, why are they included in the halachas of guarding the Beis Hamikdash? The halachas biz halach yudal of geherin zu dem Perek in zei redt sich wegen Shmiras Hamikdash. These halachas up until this point are talking about guarding the Beis Hamikdash. But these two halachas, halach yud about the inspection and halach yud beis about the inspection on Shabbos, do not seem to fit in with the laws of guarding the mikdash. Rather, it seems like it's discussing the prerequisites for the order of the service of the day. They have to inspect to make sure that everything in the Azara is as it should be, in order to begin the order of the day. It really belongs in the halachas that discuss the daily work in the Beis Hamikdash. And it is mentioned there briefly, so it seems that it does belong there. So why does the Rambam even mention it over here in Hilchas Beis Hamikdash in Perek Ches, which talks about the halachas of Shmiras Hamikdash? Beis, the last halacha Yud Beis, is a hemshich from the halacha shelfanah. The last halacha Yud Beis, which discusses the inspection of Shabbos, seems to be a direct continuation, almost part of the previous halacha. Ukem mefurish, as the Rambam states very clearly, keseder hazef and halacha yidalef oisen. They were doing the same thing. Nor mizmoisiv of Shabbos given Andrish. We're just adding on the Shabbos. There was one a caveat that was done differently. Why does the Rambam separate it into its own halacha? Especially since we know that the division of the halachas in the Rambam is precise, exactly the way the Rambam separated and divided the halachas and the prakim and the individual halachas as they are in the prakim. So, and it could be learned from the fact that something is separated or something is included with something else is actually something that we could derive halacha from that. So why over here did the Rambam take this detail about Shabbos and divide it or separate it into a different halacha? The biur boza. The Rebbe is going to give two biurim. Really, the two biurim are connected. By the way, I understand the sicha is that there's two ways to look at this. Here is the first one. The Rambam is mevar b'tchilas haperek. Ashmiras hamikdash is nit mipachad oivim, nor mishum kavod hamikdash. The Rambam begins in the beginning of the perek with the perek ches, this final perek of Hilchas Beis Hamikdash, which is discussing the halachas of shmira, of guarding the Beis Hamikdash, that we're guarding the Beis Hamikdash not because we are afraid of enemies that are going to infiltrate or damage the Beis Hamikdash. The Mishum Kavod Hamikdash, the guard was there, the guarding was there as part of the honor and the prestige of the Beis Hamikdash. As the Rambam says, you can't compare a palace that has guards to a palace that doesn't have guards. The palace that has guards seems to be a much more prestigious place than a palace that's just sitting there. Von dem is move on as the protim wegen welcher es redt sich in dem Perek said mishum kavod hamikdash. So from this we understand that this Perek is not solely about shmiras hamikdash, about guarding the mikdash, but it's things that are connected to kavod hamikdash, the honor of the Beis Hamikdash. So according to this we can say as euch der inyan abdika is mishum kavod habayis, that the concept that the Beis Hamikdash had to be inspected every morning is not so much to make sure that everything is in place just so that the avodah should be able to begin, but rather it is an element in the kavod habayis, in the honor of the Beis Hamikdash. And that answers the question right away. What is the bedika, the inspection of the Beis Hamikdash, doing in the same halacha, in the same Perek as Shmiras Hamikdash, guarding the Beis Hamikdash? Because both are parts of the kavod Hamikdash. The bedika is getan geworden, beike nit nur als Achanut Avedas Hamikdash. This inspection was done not so much as a preparation to the Aveda, nor als kavod Hamikdash. Rather, it was part of the kavod of the Beis Hamikdash. As it is explained in a different sicha about the shmira, as the teuchen hakavod durch shmiras hamikdash besteht in them. What is so honorable about the guarding the Beis Hamikdash? Was the shmira weiß, as wir nicht passiert das von the Mikdash. The guarding, it shows that we never take our mind off of the Beis Hamikdash. We're always thinking about it. We're always present, making sure it's being taken care of. So following this thinking, that the shmira is a form of not being Masiach Das, so to the inspection. The fact that every morning we would go and inspect and make sure that everything is in order, so that everything can be done that day properly. This is not just a practical thing to make sure that everything is in place, but it's actually part of not being Masiach Das, and therefore it is an element in the kavod Hamikdash. And according to this, it'll make it more geschmack. Was die Kohanim Abeitkim nach der Bdike haben gesagt, Elu le'elu shalom hakel shalom. This will make it more understood why the Kohanim who performed the inspection, after they would finish, they would say to each other, Shalom hakel shalom, peace, everything is peace. Und nicht erlassen, was lechere mehr Massen zu sagen, als das Beseder und Muchan Vedas Hamikdash, and not use a different type of phrase that would be more appropriate to inform each other that everything is in order and ready to do the Avodah. Vayakhel b'mkaimai, everything is in its place. Or that hakel karoi, everything is as it is. To use a more slang, everything is under control. Why did they use the word shalom hakel shalom? That's Allah shall kavod. It's a more honorable phrase than saying everything's under control or everything's in its place. Everything's in its place sounds like you're just making sure that the everything's on the right shelf. But when you say shalom hakel shalom, it is a more overarching expression to say that everything is at peace, everything is as it should be in the most respectable, dignified manner. So that is the foundation of the answer that the Rebbe is going to give with regards to Ein Shabbos Hamikdash. And that is that we have to first understand that the reason, the idea behind the inspection that took place every day was that of kavod, was that of honor to the Beis Hamikdash. Now we're going to understand, now using this reasoning, we'll be able to understand the idea of Ein Shabbos Hamikdash, but first we're going to introduce one more idea, and that is the fact that on Chanukah, when it came to the Nes Chanukah, the Eibishter made a miracle, that the oil that should have lasted for 1 day lasted for 8 days, and we're going to ask, why did we need a miracle if the halacha is, at least according to one opinion, that tuma hutra b'tzibur, that when something is tamei, but it affects the entire congregation, the entire community, the chachamim permitted to use something that's tamei. So they could have used the impure olive oil. Why did they need the nes? According to this, the fact that the inspection was an act of kavod to the Beis Hamikdash, this will answer our question. Why the Rambam does not rely on the allowance of Ein Shvuz B'Mikdash. First, we have to preface in the story of the miracle of the oil. The Greeks defiled all of the oil that was in the Beis Hamikdash. Then they went and they searched and they found only one jar of olive oil that was still sealed with the seal of the Kohen Gadol. It only had enough to light for one day. There was a miracle. And they were able to light for 8 days. There's a very well-known question. There is an opinion that holds that when something is tamei, which generally speaking we would not use it because it's tamei, and everything in the Beis Hamikdash has to be tahor. Nevertheless, if this affects the entire congregation, then it's hutra. Then it becomes mutter. You're allowed to do something even if it's tamei. So according to this opinion, why did the Eibush have to make a miracle with the oil? They were allowed to light the oil with shemen tamei because since they had no other oil, and therefore the only other option would be to not light the menorah, which would affect the tzibur, would affect everyone. So the halacha, according to this opinion, is that you would be allowed to light the menorah with non-pure olive oil. So who needs the nays if halachically you're allowed to use the shemen tamei? And for the Mefarshim answer that even though it's true that tumah is allowed when it affects the entire community, the Eibusher wanted to display how precious the Yidden are to him. And therefore he made a miracle. So the Yidden should be able to fulfill this mitzvah of kindling the menorah in an oven was bedarfnit ankommen zum heter von tumah, without having to rely on the heter, on the allowance of using non-pure olive oil, impure olive oil. In other words, the fact that the tumah is permissible is that's when you're talking about the aveda. When you're looking at the actual job that has to get done, you're allowed to use something that's tamei or a person that's tamei. But when you're talking about the relationship of the Eibishter with Yidden and the Eibishter's, the preciousness that the Yidden have to the Eibishter, we have to avoid using the tumah, even though halachically it's permissible. In other words, the Eibishter did not want the Yidden to have to do a second class job and say that now when we're lighting the menorah after this victory, we're going to use shemen tamei because that's the halacha. The Eibishter wanted to show them how precious they are, and made a nace that halachically you could say was not necessary, but it was necessary to prove how much the Eibishter loves the Yidden. And the same idea could be applied in our discussion with regards to the inspection that would take place early Shabbos morning, and the fact that the Rambam does not want them to break a shvus and tells them instead to use the lamps that were kindled from before Shabbos. If it was just another item that had to get done, even if it was a part of the Aveda, is there din as ein Shvus Hamikdash, and the din is truly that there's no concept of Shvus. The Rambam says elsewhere that this is not something that's a b'diavad, that is a secondary situation, but even lechatchila, even to begin with, even in the best possible scenario, there is the allowance that a person that should break the shvus and do whatever avodah this is in order to have it done right. So, but that's only if you're looking at this from the perspective that it's part of the avodah. But since, as we said in Siv Dalid, that this bedika, the inspection, was not just about the avodah, but it was about the honor of the Beis Hamikdash. So in order to emphasize how important it is, the honor of the Mikdash, similar to what we say with regards to the awe that one is obligated to have in the Beis Hamikdash, it's not from the bayis itself, from the building itself. Rather, it's from He who commanded to have the base to be in awe of the Beis Hamikdash, which means that the Yiras Hamikdash is really Yiras Hashem. Similarly, with regards to the honor of the Mikdash, what are we honoring? Who are we honoring? We're honoring the Eibishter who commanded us to build the Beis Hamikdash. So since the inspection was part of the Kavod HaMikdash, is badem nit masim as the bedikir so malachatchila zayin and nefen as bedarf ankumen to a heter von Einshvus HaMikdash. It is inappropriate that the inspection should be done in a way that we have to rely on a heter, on an allowance, and do this in a second grade, second class level. We want to do it in the best possible way, and therefore we don't want to have to break a shvus. This is why the Rambam paskins that they shouldn't use the torches in their hands, not because it wasn't allowed had this been an Aveda, but because this is also Kavod HaMikdash, we want to do it in the most honorable, dignified way, and that is to not have to depend on a heter of Ein Shvus HaMikdash. Damit sich move von was der Braten der Bedike at the Shabbos is given anders wie Vayakhel. This will also explain why this detail, the fact that Shabbos was different than the weekday, is Aleph Shaykh Hilchas Beis Hamikdash belongs in Hilchas Beis Hamikdash Beis kumt in halacha b'fnei atzma, and secondly, it is placed in its own halacha. Hayos der mit kumt zu noch aggressere und starkere Hadgash in Kavod HaMikdash, because this highlights a greater emphasis in the Kavod of the Mikdash. By putting it in a separate halacha, the Rambam is telling us, not only, as we said in halacha Yud Aleph, that every single day, in order to enhance the honor of the Mikdash, we would inspect it every day, but more than that, there's another halacha. We're taking this to the next level. The bedik is given in a neif and muhud. The inspection was done in the most dignified, honorable way. Which is why on Shabbos we would not rely on a heter. Rather, we would use the candles that were already lit before Shabbos. So the halacha Yud Beis, the Rambam puts it in a separate halacha to emphasize that this is a whole nother level in expressing the Kavod HaMikdash that was done through the bedika. Not only was the bedika itself a form of expressing Kavod HaMikdash, but the fact that on Shabbos they didn't use the heter of Ein Shvus HaMikdash shows that this is even a greater level of Kavod. This is why it is with this halacha that we conclude the whole set of halachas of Beis Hamikdash, which cover, among other things, the Kavod of the Beis Hamikdash. Because this halacha conveys the respect of the Beis Hamikdash, the honor of the Beis Hamikdash, in the greatest possible way. A conduct that is the beauty within the beauty. So, to summarize this biur, we said that Shmiras HaMikdash is an inyan of kavod. Bedika, the daily inspection, was also a form of kavod, which is why it is placed in the same perek as the other things that are discussing Shmiras HaMikdash. And once we understand that it's about kavod, we now understand why the Rambam doesn't want to rely on the heter of Ein Shvus HaMikdash, because we want to do this inspection in the most beautiful possible way, which is to not rely on any heterim. In Siv Zayin, the Rebbe is going to give another beer. It's not entirely a brand new beer, because somewhat it depends on some of the ideas that were already introduced. But the Rebbe takes it to another level to bring out another point that will help us understand why we're not using the heter of Ein Shvus HaMikdash. But first we have to preface a very interesting paradox. We're talking here about Ein Shvus HaMikdash. But let's go b'chlal about how does it work with regards to the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash and Shabbos. With regards to doing malacha in the Beis Hamikdash on Shabbos, we find a paradox, two opposites. Von einer Seite ist Avedis Atbid nu Musaf und Shar Kaponas Asibur Shazanum Kavua, nicht nur Doiche Shabbos und Mutter B'Shabbos, nor Sida Mitzvah. On the one hand, we find that the daily avodah, the carbon tamid, or the carbon musaf on Shabbos Yantif or the Shchedesh, and other carbonis that had a designated time that couldn't be done on the next day, not only do they override Shabbos, not only are they permissible on Shabbos, but it is a mitzvah to do them on Shabbos. Mi'idoch Gisa, on the other hand, Aber is the din as ein binyan Beis Hamikdash teiche Shabbos. When it comes to building the Beis Hamikdash, that does not override Shabbos. As it is learned in the Mechilt in the beginning of our Parshas Vayakhel. Therefore, was Moshe hat maktim wenn dem Tzivui von Iser Melacha b'Shabbos zum Tzivui von Melachas HaMishkan, when Moshe gathers all the Yidden to tell them about building the Beis Hamikdash, building the Mishkan. He introduces it by telling them the din of observing Shabbos. From this, the Mechilta learns that the binyan Beis Hamikdash was not Deiche Shabbos. The building of Beis Hamikdash did not override Shabbos. So this seems like a paradox. When you come to the building of the Beis Hamikdash, you're not allowed. It's not Deiche Shabbos. It doesn't override Shabbos. But then, when you're doing avodah in the Beis Hamikdash, it's a mitzvah on Shabbos to do it, even though it entails desecrating Shabbos. And this is the explanation. Noch then was der Mikdash is shein amakim kadosh v'shleimus, after the Beis Hamikdash was completed, and it is a holy space. Und es letztlich wegen a prat amalacha in Beis Hamikdash, and we're discussing a detail, an element within the Beis Hamikdash. Demolt werden sie nicht gerechnet am Eisachel. Then these details are not considered a mundane act. Once you're inside the holy space, everything that you do is holy and not mundane. So it's not called desecrating Shabbos or violating Shabbos, because what you're doing, because you're in the space of the Beis Hamikdash, which is a holy space, even things that outside of that space would be considered mundane activities that are prohibited on Shabbos, but inside the Beis Hamikdash, they're considered acts of holiness. But when you're creating the Beis Hamikdash, and you're creating the holiness, which means it's not there yet, you're just trying to bring it together, then it's not appropriate, it doesn't make sense that you should try to create holiness by doing something that violates or desecrates Shabbos. So this is the explanation. When you're talking about building the Beis Hamikdash, you're still trying to create this space of holiness. It has to be done with in the holiest way possible, and not to entail any aspect of Chilul Shabbos. But once the place is built and the holiness is there, then the things you're doing inside that space are by definition holy because of the space that they are in. And therefore, on Shabbos, you're allowed to be Mechalel Shabbos even in the Beis Hamikdash. V'al derech, since earlier we used the example of the Neis Chanukah, we'll bring another explanation for the Neis Chanukah that expresses this point that we're making over here, that there's a difference between when you're creating the space, the holiness, and when you're inside the space of holiness. Which this would be similar to another explanation that are brought by the Mefarshim with regards to the Nes of Chanukah. The reason that by Nes Chanukah we did not rely on the rule that Tumah is permissible in the case that it affects the entire community, and instead the Eibishter made a Nes, a miracle, that the oil should last for 8 days, is because then they were rededicating the entire Beis Hamikdash anew. And when you're making a new holiness, when you're recreating this holy space, you can't say Tumuhutra. It's like building the Beis Hamikdash, where you can't rely on anything that's a Chilul Shabbos, you can't rely on anything that's Tameh. only once you're inside the space, then you could rely on that tumah. But by the Nes Chanukah, which Chanukah comes from the word chinuch, from dedication, they were rededicating the space that had been defiled by the Greeks. They could not rely on tumah hutra. It had to be done in the best possible way. So now we can apply the same concept to the Shvus prohibitions in the Beis Hamikdash. Where did the Chacham say that there's no Shvus, that you're allowed to transgress a Shvus? That's when you're doing something in the Beis Hamikdash, part of the Avodah or the Melacha, the work that was done inside the Beis Hamikdash. Inside, I don't mean in the building, but in the space, in the spiritual space of the already made holiness of the Beis Hamikdash. When you're talking about the actual building, including the honor of the Beis Hamikdash, which, as we said earlier, is part of the building of the Beis Hamikdash. The Chachamim, that everything that they established it emulating the De'iraisa, and since in the De'iraisa, when it comes to Binyan HaMikdash, you cannot be Mechalel Shabbos, so too even inside the Beis Hamikdash, when you're talking about a Shvus, if this thing that you're doing is related to the kavod of the Mikdash, which is part of Binyan HaMikdash, the Shvus would not be allowed. Das Aufmachen oder Moisv sein, verstärken die Kedusha for the Beis Hamikdash, to create the holiness or to intensify and strengthen the holiness of the Beis Hamikdash, darf nicht getan werden durch a Meister shel Shvus, should not done through a Shvus action. So this is a little bit of a different explanation. Earlier we explained that because it was a Meister shel Kavod, therefore it wouldn't be it wouldn't properly honor the Beis Hamikdash if you were to rely on a heter on a shvus. Here we're saying something more than that. Here we're saying that being that the bedika was part of kavod hamikdash, it's related to the binyan hamikdash, and when it comes to binyan hamikdash, it's not doicha Shabbos, and if it's not doicha Shabbos, it's not either doicha or shvus. And following this reasoning, that we are talking about, when we talk about the bedika, the inspection, it falls under the category of binyan hamishkan. Now we will also understand why the Rambam includes these halachas in Hilchas Beis Abchira. B'negeya dem tam was die halachas von Spinnes verkavod hamikdash hat der Rambam reingestellt in Hilchas Beis Abchira. So now we can explain the reason why the Rambam places these halachas in Hilchas Beis Abchira. Now derech das was Rabbi Hakadosh hat geweig when the dinim for Shmiras Hamikdash oich im Masechta Midas. This will also explain why the Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, the compiler of the Mishnah, included the dinim of guarding the Beis Hamikdash in Masechta Midas. Was in Yonah sind die Midas Abayis und nicht bloß dort, wo es letztlich wegen der Avodas Hanasis bei. The Masechta Midas speaks about the measurements of the Beis Hamikdash, the architecture of the Beis Hamikdash, the building plans. So why did Rabbeinu HaKadosh put the guarding of the Mishkan in Masechta Midas and not in another Masechta that would discuss the Avodah, the work that was done in the Beis Hamikdash? This was also covered in a different sikha, or I think we had it more than once. The mitzvah, and this is a chakira that is had between the Rishonim. Is the mitzvah to build the Beis Hamikdash, or is the mitzvah to have a Beis Hamikdash? You have to build it in order to have it, but the mitzvah is to have it. The mitzvah of Beis Hamikdash is der chiyuv, nit peulas habinyan, no die titzah von der peula der nifel. And the Rebbe is citing that the mitzvah of building the Beis Hamikdash is not the act of building, rather it's the result of the building, the act of having it. Sheyiyah. As a Zolzaina Beis Hamikdash, that there should be a Beis Hamikdash. The Rogatchover explains this at length. So the mitzvah of building the Beis Hamikdash is to have a Beis Hamikdash. Lefize is move on. And now we understand that guarding the Beis Hamikdash is part of this. But Eich die Schmiede is Peil soll sein Sheyia Beis Hamikdash Abayis shel Kavod Amakim Roi to sein a Beis Hamikdash. Because also the guarding, the protection, is also part of the fact that they're maintaining, so to speak, the fact that there should be a house of honor, a house that's chosen by Hashem. In other words, if you said the mitzvah was to build the Beis Hamikdash, one could technically argue that once it's already built, the mitzvah is done, and therefore what happens after it is not connected to the mitzvah of building the Beis Hamikdash. But if you say that the mitzvah is to have the Beis Hamikdash, then it's not just about the building, it's about maintaining it as well. And Shmiras Hamikdash, guarding and protecting the Beis Hamikdash, is part of maintaining the building, and therefore it's part of binyan, and it belongs in the Beis Hamikdash. And according to this, we can conclude that also the fact that the Kohanim are inspecting it on a daily basis, which, as we said earlier in the Sikha, is connected to the kavod, the honor of the Beis Hamikdash, is not just a prerequisite to the avodah of the day, nor is the inspection, which is part of the kavod, is part of the binyan of the building. The bedika is al derech bedek habayis. The inspection is like part of the maintenance of the house. Their bayis vet mer mechubed muder. The house becomes more honorable and more beautiful. Rabbi says, and now we can conclude and bring it all together why we're not saying Ein Shvus B'Mikdash when it comes to the inspection. Since this inspection is part of the building of the Beis Hamikdash, therefore, and the Chachamim instituted as it would be midayraisa that you can, that binyan hamikdash is not deiche Shabbos. Binyan hamikdash is not either deiche the Rabbanon. It doesn't need deiches and zeiris shvus. That even the isa Rabbanon should also not be overridden by that the isa shvus should not be overridden by the bedika, and the bedika is done in a way that doesn't break a shvus. They use the candles that were lit from before Shabbos. So this is, in a sense, this is a second beer. Beer number one was because it's part of the kavod hamikdash. Therefore, it would be more honorable to not rely on a shvus. Beer number two is that because it's considered part of binyan hamikdash, and binyan hamikdash is not deiche Shabbos, therefore it's not deiche shvus either. Now, we had mentioned that this halacha is the end of the siyum of the conclusion of these halachas Hilchas Beis Hamikdash. And according to the first hezber, we explained why is this the siyum? Because we want to end with the most beautiful way of honoring the Beis Hamikdash, and that is that even when they did the bedika on Shabbos, they did not break a shvus. In Siftes, the Rebbe is going to connect the siyum with the haschala according to the second beer that the bedika is a part of binyan hamikdash. And it's going to say how the Rebbe very often would connect the siyum and the haschala, that according to this hezber, the second hezber, the siyum of Hilchas Beis Hamikdash is directly connected to the haschala of Hilchas Beis Hamikdash. And according to this, we can now connect the end of the halachas to the beginning. The note, as we know that the end is always connected with the beginning. In the beginning of Hilchas Beis Hamikdash, the Rambam establishes the parameters of this mitzvah. To make a house for Hashem. Nit livnois. The Rambam doesn't say the mitzvah is to build a house for Hashem. The Rambam says it's to make a house for Hashem. Was der Fun lernt men up. And this is one of the places from where the Rogatchover learns, as the mitzvah is nit the pu'ulas abniyah, that the mitzvah is not the act of building, nor the titzah, rather it's the outcome, as is Ozaina bayis laHashem it ala protim bayis darfaben, that it should be a house for Hashem with all of the details, with all of the amenities that a house of Hashem needs. So as we see it in the very beginning, that the Rambam uses the term lasos, which teaches us that the mitzvah is to have a house, not just to build a house. And from this we learn that even after the building was done, to constantly maintain the building in a manner that it should be a house for Hashem. This very idea is emphasized in the last Perek. For this very reason, because the mitzvah is to have a house, and you have to constantly upkeep this house, or keep up this house, that it should be a house befitting for Hashem. Therefore, guarding and protecting the Beis Hamikdash is part of this. Until the very, very conclusion. As Mitzademo says, is a prat in binyan boni from Beis Hamikdash, is as nid doiche Shabbos, until the very last item on the discussed in the Beis Hamikdash, the inspection of the Beis Hamikdash. That since that too is a part of the building of the Beis Hamikdash, it is not doiche Shabbos. It doesn't even override a Shavuos. So the very same concept is discussed in the beginning. The fact that the mitzvah of the Beis Hamikdash is to have a house and to keep up this house in the manner that's befitting to Hashem. Similarly, in the end, we talk about Shmiras Hamikdash, to maintain this house in an honorable way. And even in the very last halacha, it stands out this point that when it comes to inspecting the Beis Hamikdash, it's done in a way that is a way of kavod, to continually maintain the proper respect for this Beis Hamikdash. And one of the ways that it's done is by recognizing that it's a chelek of binyan Hamikdash, and therefore not overriding Shabbos, not even overriding a Shavuos. Der Biur HaKesher from Tchilas Hilchas Beis Hamikdash V'Siyuman, and now to elaborate on this, this connection between the beginning and the end of Hilchas Beis Hamikdash, on a deeper level, in Sif Yud. It was discussed many times as afalpi was mitten binyan hamishkan ubayis rishon v'sheni hot me mekaying when the mitzvah of Vayakhel Mikdash, that even though when they built the first Beis Hamikdash and then the second Beis Hamikdash, that was the fulfillment of the mitzvah, you shall make for me a mikdash, a sanctuary. But that was not the ultimate completion or the ultimate perfection of this mitzvah. This will only be accomplished by the mikdash, by the Beis Hamikdash that would be prepared by the hands of Hashem. Bayis Hashlishi, the third Beis Hamikdash, was V'zayin Bayis Nitzchi, which will be an eternal Beis Hamikdash. We actually discussed this just recently when we spoke about the Geniza of the Aron, the fact that the Aron was hidden. We spoke about the first two Bati Mikdashes versus the Bayis Shlishi, that's Mikdash Adnai Kein Liyadecha. It is eternal because it's made by the Eibishter. Das ist echt der Tam Apnimi, was die letzte Halach von Hilchas Beis Hamikdash wegen dem Seder von Bedikas Azara in Mikdash B'Yom HaShabbos. This concept that the ultimate completion of the Beis Hamikdash is when Mashiach comes is alluded to in the fact that the Rambam concludes these halachas with the order of the inspection that was done specifically on the day of Shabbos. The Rambam is to allude to us as the siyum ushleimus of Beis Hamikdash, that the ultimate culmination and completion of the Beis Hamikdash is in the Mikdash Vesvet Zayin Lasid Lavai in the Yom Shekulei Shabbos. That when are we going to see the siyum of Beis Hamikdash, the culmination and the completion of the building? On Shabbos, meaning the Yom Shekulei Shabbos, when Mashiach comes, the day that is known, the time that is known as Shabbos. Kemen doch meinen. Person might think that since the completion of this Beis Hamikdash is only going to happen when Mashiach comes in the future, he would think that what we do today, chas v'shalom, our avodah today, is not meaningful. It has no significance. There's no Beis Hamikdash, and everything that was done till now is not the ultimate. And therefore the Rambam clarifies as Adarabbe, that quite the contrary, B'leili Shabbos ein biyadam, or they don't have fire with them, they don't have light with them in their hands. Elaboitkin b'nedus adlukim sham of Shabbos. They are checking, they are inspecting the Beis Hamikdash with light that was lit from Erev Shabbos. In dem zman fun yom shekulei Shabbos, in the time where it's totally Shabbos, is ein biyadam, or ner mitzvah v'teira or, they don't have fire, they don't have light in their hands. These are a time that people are going to say, I don't want this. Mashiach is going to come, people are going to say, I don't want this time. Because in and of itself, it does not have inherent light. Und die Lichtigkeit, was es demol da, nimmt sich Davke von den Nedes Mitzvahs, was man angezogen mit Erev Shabbos, since man Agolus. The light that we're going to experience when Mashiach comes will be the light that was kindled from Erev Shabbos, from before Mashiach comes, from the time of Golus. In the time of Golus is when we kindle the fire. And that is the light that we will benefit from when Mashiach comes. Die Shleimus von Beis Hamikdash is was demol when is Galeveren. The ultimate completion of the third Beis Hamikdash is that then it will be revealed to us the value of the avodah that we're doing today. Ma'aseinu v'avodaseinu kos mamash ha'galus, our deeds and our actions throughout the duration of Galus. Today we don't appreciate it. We don't understand its value. When Mashiach comes, then we'll appreciate the value. That is the Shleimus. The Shleimus is that we'll be able to use the light and the fire that was kindled on Erev Shabbos before Mashiach comes, and we'll be able to enjoy that light and to appreciate that light after Mashiach comes. This encourages us and strengthens us in our avodah to erect our own personal, spiritual Beis Hamikdash. As the Chazal teaches, that there is a Beis Hamikdash, there is a sanctuary within each and every Yid that does bring the Binyan Beis Hamikdash Lishi, which this will bring about the building of the third Beis Hamikdash, B'geula ha'amitis v'hashlema b'meheira v'yameinu mamash.